All right, y'all. We have made it to the last chapter in week one. Chapter 4. Let's wrap it up. You got a couple things you got to do for me. And then we're going to be moving on already to week 2. So good job. Excellent work. We're getting through it. Chapter 4, operationalizing social work values and ethics. I love talking about ethics. I think it's so important for us to know and talk about in social work. Our NASW code of ethics. Again, I mentioned this I think maybe back in chapter 1. Make sure you know it. Make sure you know how to find it. Make sure you've read through it. The big idea in this chapter is really the concept that ethics become complicated when values collide. All right, so a couple key points here. Number one, knowing the code of ethics is not the same as practicing ethically. Real ethical dilemmas rarely have obvious answers. And the best part about social work is that you don't have to make hard decisions by yourself, okay? So it is incredibly important to have a supervisor, someone you can consult with, a trusted colleague to walk through ethical dilemmas with. And that way you're making the best decision possible. So we always go to our NASW code of ethics, process with a supervisor. Y'all, there have even been times that I've been faced with some pretty challenging ethical dilemmas, or a supervisee has, and I've said, you know what, let's call the board. So don't be afraid to call the board and ask what their thought might be on the ethical dilemma and the best way to handle it, and then document that. Number 2, personal values between professional values must be differentiated, okay? Students, please recognize situations in which your own beliefs could affect your practice, right? So, some things to consider. Can you effectively serve someone whose decisions or beliefs are very different from yours? So, remember, in social work, we put our stuff to the side to help our clients. And oftentimes, our clients' values are different from ours. Their ethnicities are different, their culture is different, their religion might be different, their race might be different. People are coming to us with a very different background. So, again, processing maybe where you're feeling stuck, or where there could be a difference in values is going to be really helpful for you to continue a working relationship with the client. Self-determination has limits, but we shouldn't limit it simply because we disagree, okay? So there's a difference between autonomy and safety, okay? So here's a good example. And this is a classic example that I have given my students before, but let's say you're working with a mom and she's got 2 children, and she is mentioning to you that she's in a very abusive relationship and her partner is threatening to seriously hurt her, but she is afraid to leave the relationship. Can mom go back to the relationship? Yeah, she can. She can return to the relationship. She has that right to self-determination. But now there's a safety issue potentially for the children. And so, ethically speaking, and by law, you also have to make a report, a CPS report. Okay, so that's just an example of like where self-determination may have limits. Like, yeah, mom can go back into the relationship. She's an adult, and she maybe, you've processed consequences. Maybe you've made a safety plan even. Mom can make that decision, but we're also going to protect the kids. So make sure you understand the difference between autonomy and when there's a safety issue, okay? Self-determination is one of the hardest for me, I think, and for a lot of people I've worked with, the hardest social work value to really work through sometimes. Confidentiality is foundational, but it is not absolute, okay? So remember, we must get informed consent when we're working with clients, especially our minors. We are all mandated reporters. We are always assessing for danger and safety concerns. If we want to talk to another provider or even family member of our client, we have to get a release of information signed. And sometimes we're going to use consultation to process difficult cases. So I always, at the beginning of every single working relationship, I go over limits of confidentiality with my clients, even my children that I work with, right? So everything we talk about in here is private, is confidential, unless you tell me you want to hurt yourself, someone else, or someone is hurting you. And sometimes the way that I break that down for the littles is I'll start by saying, has anyone ever told you a secret? What is a secret? Because they're not going to know what confidentiality means, but they'll know what a secret is. And so that's a good starting point for talking about our limits of confidentiality in practice. There's also specific legal requirements that vary by jurisdiction and setting. So also keep in mind, there are going to be times you're going to go to your code of ethics, you're going to go to NASW code of ethics, you're also going to go to the law. What does the law say in the state that you're practicing in? Okay, next, boundaries are not about being cold. They're about protecting both you and the client. Okay, so there's lots of boundaries that can be crossed while you're working with a client. Social media friend requests, them bringing gifts, seeing a client in public. What do you do with that? Dual relationships. Maybe you know them from a previous workplace or from church. Personal disclosure, like what do we share with our clients? What do we not share? So there's so much that I want to say about this, but make sure you've read through those sections in the Code of Ethics. And if you want to have a deeper conversation or specific questions about these, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. And if need be, I'll hop back in and put in another video with more examples. Okay, so putting it into practice as we're wrapping this chapter up, let's say a client sends you a Facebook friend request. What factors would you consider before responding? Something to think about because our clients have access to us through social media. Remember, everything you put out there is visible and accessible to the people we work with. And one thing to remember is ethical practice requires ongoing judgment, consultation, and self-awareness. It's not simply memorizing rules. Once a client, always a client. All right, y'all, see you next week.